The gavel was already raised when I walked through those double doors. I heard my cousin's voice before I even saw her face. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough for half the room to turn. "Is that Vivian? What is she doing here?" Her husband laughed. Not a small laugh, the kind that carries. I kept walking. Found a seat near the back. Picked up a bidding paddle from the registration table like I was picking up a menu. My aunt leaned over to whisper something to my uncle. He looked back at me, then looked away like I wasn't worth a second glance, like I'd shown up to a black tie dinner and a paper bag. The auctioneer cleared his throat. The room settled, and I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, thinking, let them laugh. 30 minutes from now, everything changes. My mother died on a Tuesday in March, 6 years before any of this happened. I was 22. I had a part-time job at a copy center, a half-finished degree in accounting, and exactly $412 in my checking account. My uncle showed up at the hospital before I even had time to cry. He had a manila folder with him. He said he just wanted to make sure everything was handled properly, that Mom would have wanted the family to take care of things, that I didn't need to worry about any of it. I was 22 and I had just watched my mother take her last breath, and I trusted him completely. He was her older brother. He'd had dinner at our house every Sunday for as long as I could remember. He taught me how to drive a stick shift in an empty parking lot when I was 15. I called him Uncle Dennis. So when he sat me down 2 weeks after the funeral and explained that Mom had left some debt behind, that the house had a second mortgage I didn't know about, that after everything was settled there wouldn't be much left, I believed him. He said he and my aunt would take me in, just temporarily until I got back on my feet. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I moved into their guest room with 2 suitcases and a box of my mother's books. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until years later, was that my mother's life insurance policy had paid out $180,000 3 weeks after she passed. Uncle Dennis was the one who called the insurance company. He handled the claim, and then he deposited that money into an account I never saw. I also didn't know that the house, our house, the one I grew up in, the one my mother had paid off the mortgage on 8 years earlier, was worth $340,000. Uncle Dennis sold it 14 months after she died. He told me it had to be sold to cover debts. He showed me a piece of paper I didn't understand, and I signed where he told me to sign. I was 22. I'd never probated an estate. I didn't know what I didn't know. I got nothing. He told me that was how it worked out. He seemed genuinely sorry about it. I stayed in their guest room for almost 2 years. My aunt made it clear, in small ways, that I was a burden. She'd leave grocery lists on the counter with my items circled, the ones she expected me to pay for. She'd mention, casually, how much utilities cost, how the water bill had gone up. My cousin, their daughter, Renee, had her own bathroom and a car that got replaced every 2 years. I worked. I saved. I finished my degree at night, taking 1 or 2 classes a semester because that's all I could afford. Uncle Dennis said college was a long shot for me, that accounting was too competitive, that maybe I should look at something more practical. He said it kindly, the way you'd say something to someone you'd already decided had a ceiling. I didn't argue. I just kept going. I got my CPA license at 26. Got a job at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte. Moved out of their house on a Wednesday with the same 2 suitcases I'd arrived with, plus a second box of books. My aunt hugged me at the door. My uncle said I was always welcome back. Renee didn't come downstairs. I drove away and I didn't cry. I was done being a guest in someone else's house. The next 4 years are the part of the story where not much happens dramatically, but everything actually happens. I worked. I was good at it. I moved from staff accountant to senior accountant to manager faster than most people at that firm did. I saved aggressively. No car payment, tiny apartment, packed lunch every day. I started doing consulting on the side. Small businesses that needed help cleaning up their books. One of those clients was a woman named Harriet, who ran a property management company in Raleigh. She was 61, sharp as a tack, and she'd been doing this for 30 years. She took a liking to me, taught me how she thought about real estate as an asset class. I started investing small, one condo, then another, using equity to grow slowly. By the time I was 30, I had more money than anyone in my family had ever suspected. Not obscene money, not yet, but enough. I stayed away from Uncle Dennis and his family mostly. Showed up to Thanksgiving twice because not showing up felt like a statement I wasn't ready to make. Smiled across the table. Answered questions about work with vague, modest answers. They thought I was doing okay. Stable. Nothing special. That was fine with me. Then, 8 months before the auction, my second cousin forwarded me an email by accident. It was meant for Renee. It was from Uncle Dennis, and it was about the Callaway estate. The Callaway estate was a property about 40 minutes outside Charlotte, 14 acres, a main house with 9 bedrooms, a carriage house, a pond. It had belonged to a family that had made money in textiles 100 years ago. The last surviving heir had died without children, and after a long legal process, the property was going to public auction. The estimate was $7 to $9 million. Uncle Dennis's email explained in detail how he planned to win it. He'd been quietly liquidating for 2 years, he wrote. He'd refinanced his house, his rental properties, a commercial lot he owned in Gastonia. He had $6.2 million in accessible capital. He was working on securing a bridge loan for another $1.5 million. He thought he could get the estate for under $8 million if the other bidders tapped out early, which his real estate contact predicted they would. He was going to flip it, subdivide the land, sell off parcels, convert the main house into an event venue. His contact had projected a $4 million profit minimum, possibly more. He'd even written in the middle of the email, "The best part is nobody in our circle even knows this property is on the market. We'll be the only serious money in the room." I read that email 4 times. Then I called Harriet. "I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. I didn't do what I did purely out of revenge. That's not entirely honest, and this story deserves to be told honestly. There was absolutely a part of me, a significant part, that wanted Uncle Dennis to lose. Wanted him to stand in that room and watch something slip through his hands the way he'd made things slip through mine. But the investment case was also real. I'd had my eye on a different property in that county for 2 years. The Callaway estate was better. More land, better bones, better location for the kind of boutique hospitality development that was starting to move into that corridor. Harriet agreed immediately when I walked her through the numbers. We structured a partnership. She brought capital and 30 years of contacts. I brought capital and the operating plan. We capped our bid at $12 million and agreed we'd go no higher than that. I hired an attorney to review the auction terms and walk me through exactly how the bidding would work. I made sure I understood every line. I did not tell anyone in my family that I was going. I registered under my legal name, Vivian M. Hartwell. I showed up alone. I wore a plain gray blazer and flat shoes and no jewelry except the small gold studs my mother had given me for my 18th birthday. I sat in the back, and then my aunt spotted me. She came over during the registration period before the auction started. She was wearing a cream blazer and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Vivian, what a surprise." She glanced around like she was making sure people saw her acknowledging me. "Are you here for work, covering this for your firm?" "No," I said. "I'm here to bid." She blinked. Then she laughed. A small, indulgent laugh, the kind you use with someone who has said something charmingly naive. "Oh, how fun. Well, don't get too attached, sweetheart. Dennis has done a lot of work on this one." She patted my arm and went back to her seat. Uncle Dennis caught my eye from across the room. He gave me a nod, the kind you give someone you're not worried about. Renee leaned over and said something to her husband. They both smiled. I looked down at my paddle. Number 14. The auctioneer called the room to order. The bidding opened at $5 million. 3 paddles went up immediately. Within 4 minutes, it was at $6.5 million, and 2 of the early bidders had dropped out. At $7 million, it was down to Uncle Dennis and one other buyer, a developer from Greensboro I didn't recognize. The Greensboro developer dropped out at $7.8 million. Uncle Dennis raised his paddle, $8 million. The room was quiet. The auctioneer scanned for competition. I raised mine, $8.1 million. My aunt turned around so fast she nearly knocked her program off her chair. Uncle Dennis stared at me. His expression went through 3 or 4 things in about 2 seconds: confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like dismissal. He raised his paddle. 8.5 million. I raised mine. 8.6 million. His jaw tightened. 9 million. His jaw tightened. 9 million. I let a beat pass. Not for dramatic effect. I genuinely just wanted to be sure. I looked at my phone, where I had our maximum written down in a note I'd made 3 weeks earlier. I already knew what it said. 9.1 million, I said. He went to $9.5 million, I said. He went to $9.5 million without hesitating. I think he thought that would end it. $9.6 million, I said. Now his wife had her hand on his arm. His face had gone a color I'd never seen it go before. Not angry exactly. Something closer to frightened. Here is the thing about the bidding that I need to explain, because I've heard people wonder about it. Why not just jump to $10 million and end it? Why bid in $100,000 increments? Because I didn't want to signal how high I could go. I wanted him to keep raising. I wanted him to commit more than he planned to push past whatever his internal ceiling was in his desperation to beat me specifically. There is a psychological reality at an auction where, when you're being outbid by someone you've underestimated, you start making decisions with your ego instead of your spreadsheet. Uncle Dennis proved that theory correct. He went to $10 million. His real estate contact, sitting 2 rows back, was shaking his head. I paused for a full 5 seconds this time. 10.1 million, Dennis. My aunt's voice, low and urgent, he raised his paddle. 10.5 million. I heard Renee whisper something sharp to her husband. 10.5 million. I heard Renee whisper something sharp to her husband. 10.6 million, I said. He didn't raise his paddle. The auctioneer called it once. Twice. The gavel came down. The room made a sound like an exhale. I sat very still. I didn't look at exhale. I didn't look at anyone. I looked at the auctioneer and I waited. The next part I'll describe quickly because I think the details are less important than the fact of it. Uncle Dennis had secured financing based on an expected purchase price of $8 million, with the bridge loan covering up to $7.5 million total borrowing against his assets. He had pushed his bidding past what his financing actually covered, not by a catastrophic amount, but past it. He'd been operating on the assumption that no serious competitor would push him higher than $9 million. When he lost, he wasn't simply out of pocket for the bid amount. He'd refinanced his primary residence, 2 rental properties, and the commercial lot in Gastonia. Those refinances had costs and conditions attached. The bridge loan had a term structure that assumed the acquisition would close and the estate would generate revenue within 18 months. Without the acquisition, the entire financial position he'd constructed over 2 years was unwinding against assets he no longer owned outright. I am not a person who enjoys describing someone else's financial distress. I want to be straightforward about that. But I also want to be accurate, because the version of this story where he simply lost at an auction and walked away fine is not the true version. His real estate contact explained it to him quietly in the parking lot afterward. I wasn't nearby for that conversation. I know about it because Renee called me 3 weeks later. She called to ask if I could help. I told her I was sorry for what they were going through. I meant that. I told her I wasn't in a position to provide financial assistance. I also meant that. She asked me how I'd had that kind of money without anyone knowing. I said, I saved it. She said, but where did it come from? I said, my job, Renee. The same job I've had for 8 years. There was a long pause. Mom said you were just doing okay, she said. I know, I said. I let her think that. I want to tell you about the first morning I spent at the Callaway estate after the sale closed. Harriet and I drove out together. It was early October, and the trees at the edge of the property were just starting to turn. The driveway was a quarter-mile long, lined with oak trees that had to be 100 years old. The main house had a wide porch across the entire front facade, white columns that needed repainting but were structurally sound. We walked through every room, took notes, talked about what we'd keep, what we'd restore, what we'd update. The kitchen needed everything. The east wing had a water leak that had been ignored for years, but the bones, the original hardwood floors, the 12-foot ceilings, the hand-laid stone fireplaces were extraordinary. Standing in the front parlor, looking out the tall windows at the pond and the fields, I felt something I don't have a clean word for. Not triumph, not vindication exactly, something quieter. My mother loved old houses. When I was small, she'd drive us on Sundays sometimes to neighborhoods she liked, and she'd point out houses and tell me what she imagined was inside. What kind of family lived there, what the kitchen smelled like on Sunday mornings, what the view was from the upstairs window. She made up whole stories. She had a gift for that. I thought about her standing in that parlor. I thought about the $180,000 that was supposed to come to me after she died. The house I grew up in that was supposed to be part of my inheritance. And then I thought, I'd dope this without any of that. Not because the loss didn't matter. It did. It still does. But because I had to decide at some point that what was taken from me was not going to determine what I built. That Uncle Dennis could take my mother's insurance money and my childhood home and my rightful inheritance, and I could still become someone he didn't have the imagination to see coming. That was the part that satisfied me, not watching him fail, watching myself succeed despite everything he'd taken. There's a difference. It took me a long time to understand that difference. My attorney has reviewed everything that Uncle Dennis did in the months after my mother died. The insurance claim, the home sale, the estate handling. The picture is not clean. Whether it rises to the level of legal liability is something she is still evaluating. I have made the decision not to rush that process. I am letting it be thorough. I've been asked by a few people whether I confronted him. Whether I said anything to his face? I did not. He sent me a text message 2 months after the auction. It said, "Congratulations on the property. Didn't realize you had that kind of capital. Hope you'll do well with it." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "Thank you, Uncle Dennis." And I put my phone in my pocket and went back to the renovation meeting I'd been in the middle of. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The Callaway Estate will open as a boutique event venue and inn next spring. We have 11 guest rooms in the main house, 4 suites in the restored carriage house. The event space in the south wing can accommodate 250 guests. We already have 14 weddings booked for the first year. The project came in 8% under budget, which Harriet says is a minor miracle for a historic restoration. I told her it helps when you've spent 8 years understanding exactly where money goes. I live 40 minutes away in a house I bought 2 years ago. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a porch where I drink coffee in the mornings. It's nothing like the Callaway Estate. It's the right size for one person who has spent years in other people's spaces and wanted, more than anything, a place that was entirely her own. My mother's books are in the office, on shelves I built myself from a kit I found at a hardware store. Took me an entire weekend. They're not perfectly level, but they're mine. Sometimes I drive out to the estate on Sunday mornings when it's quiet and the staff isn't in yet. I walk through the main house with a cup of coffee. I stand in the parlor and I look out at the pond. And I think about a 22-year-old girl sitting in a hospital waiting room with $412 and an uncle who had already decided what she was worth. I think about everything she built anyway, and I think, Mom, you should see this place. If you're watching from somewhere and you've had something taken from you, an inheritance, an opportunity, someone's belief in what you could become, I want you to hear this part clearly. What they took does not define the ceiling of what you build. Document everything. Learn everything. Save more than you think you need to. Find one person, even just one, who sees what you're capable of and let them teach you. And then go build something they never imagined you could. Where are you watching from today? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I've thought a lot about what my uncle actually believed when he looked across that auction room and saw me holding paddle number 14. I think he genuinely thought I was there to watch, maybe to feel something, closeness to a world he assumed I'd never touch. He'd spent years building a picture of me in his mind, and that picture had a very specific ceiling. He'd helped construct that ceiling, piece by piece, starting the day he sat across from a 22-year-old grieving girl and handed her a piece of paper she didn't fully understand. That's the part I had to sit with for a long time. Not the anger. The anger was easy. What was harder was understanding how a person gets to the place where they can do that, where they can take from someone who has nothing and still sleep fine. I don't think Uncle Dennis is a monster. I think he made a decision early on that I wasn't going to amount to much. And once he decided that, taking from me felt like less of a theft and more of a redistribution. Like the money would just be wasted on me anyway. People do that. They decide what you're worth before you've had a chance to find out yourself, and then they arrange the world accordingly. What he didn't account for was that his assessment of me was never the truth. It was just convenient. Here's what I know about how this actually works. Not in a spiritual sense, but in a plain practical one. The choices you make accumulate. Every decision you make about how to treat people, how to handle money that isn't yours, how to use your position to advantage yourself at someone else's expense, those choices don't disappear. They build a structure, and eventually you have to live inside that structure. Uncle Dennis spent 2 years building a financial position that depended entirely on winning that auction. He leveraged his home, his properties, his future income against a single outcome. He did it because he was certain. Because a man who has always gotten what he wanted tends to build his plans on certainty. I spent 8 years building something that didn't depend on any single outcome. I saved when I didn't have to. I learned things nobody told me to learn. I found Harriet, who saw something in me worth teaching. I made 100 small decisions that nobody witnessed and nobody praised. That's the difference, not luck, not fate. The accumulation of choices made in private over years when no one was watching and there was no reward for doing it right except the thing itself. Renee asked me where the money came from, like there had to be a secret. There wasn't. There was just time and consistency and the decision made over and over not to let what was taken from me become a reason to stop building. I think about the girl I was at 22 sometimes, sitting in that hospital, signing papers she didn't understand. I don't feel sorry for her. I feel proud of her, honestly. She didn't know what she was walking into, and she survived it anyway, and she kept going when she had every reason not to. That's what I want you to take from this, if you take anything at all. Not a strategy, not a formula, just this. The people who underestimate you are building their plans on a fiction. Your job is simply to make sure the truth catches up. It usually does.